me what to do. I've been telling what other people do the whole time.
So I'm very used to introing what we do from the comfort of my sewing room at home. But I don't often get to do it with a microphone in my hand. So I'm going to be talking to them, and I'm also going to be talking to you. And I would like to tell everybody that after speaking with the TikTok United States policy team, we have learned this is the first time this has ever been done. So we have never found any creator that has ever gotten a live stream going both directions to a live audience and live on TikTok. So we're doing something very historic today. I'm very excited. All right, everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the first ever live and in-person TikTok Town Hall. This is, I don't know, about our 15th or 17th TikTok Town Hall. It's been a labor of love throughout this election season, something that I was really, really excited to begin. And it's a way for us to create access for constituents to reach their candidates, but also a way for us to create accountability in the politicians that used to be accountable to us. And I was really excited when I went in for my interview today here at the Independent National Convention, which for all of you on TikTok, that is where we are live streaming from, is the Independent National Convention in Denver, Colorado. And I'm very, very excited because this started after I reached out to dozens of candidates that refused to come and be accountable to voters when I wanted to start this thing. It started with a single independent candidate saying yes. And I called up Robert F. Kennedy Jr. after getting told no over and over and over again. And he said, sure, why not? And he joined me in a live stream that was very hastily put together on 2 days' notice. And so did 100,000 people. And it was very exciting. And so today we're going to do that live. We're going to be joined in about 45 minutes by two different candidates. We're going to be speaking with candidate Dan Osborne, who's an independent candidate running for Senate in Nebraska. And then we're going to be joined by the Libertarian candidate for President, Chase Oliver. But we're going to start off with a conversation about what the INC is all about, what we're doing here, why we're all at the Independent National Convention, what is so important about independent voices, independent candidates, and the reasons that an independent vote is never a wasted vote, ever. I talk about it a lot. I think it's important, and I think it's important beyond just this election cycle. So without further ado, welcome everyone to TikTok Town Hall, live from the Independent National Convention in Denver, Colorado, where I am joined by Aaron Foley of Logic and Liberty. I am joined online by Ian Carroll of Cancel This Clothing, who you're going to see in the little box for now, but he'll be bigger in just a little while. And eventually we will be joined by some candidates. And we may also have people come up to ask questions both from the internet and from the audience. So we might have some other things. Now, Christopher, this is your baby, right? So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about why the Independent National Convention, why you want people to know about it, what we're doing here, and then we're gonna put this conversation in motion.
Very good to have you here, Tiffany, and thanks for hosting me in your space. We're co-hosting each other right now, which is kind of sweet. So I think we can start the conversation generally around what independent politics is. I think a lot of times people could say, oh, there's Republicans and there's Democrats and there's kind of independents, like it's like this thing that's categorically similar and a third thing. But I really want to start out by talking about how substantially distinct being a political independent is than being a Republican or Democrat or part of another type of political apparatus. As many of you know, it's been said multiple times over the course of this convention that the founders of this country did not intend for this country to be run by political parties. George Washington, in his farewell address, similar to Eisenhower in his farewell address, who warned against the vials of the military-industrial complex, George Washington gave a similar feeling warning, but it was about political parties.
Yeah.
Said if you allow political parties in the country, it's going to basically pervert the republic and have it start to work for private interests.
Yeah.
He was obviously right. So the original intent of this republic was individual citizen stewards that were organizing in their communities to take care of themselves, that had structures of municipal and county and state and federal government to be able to help to manage that higher level of coordination. Now, fast forward, we have a republic that is dominated by political parties. And that's problematic for a whole bunch of different reasons. If you go back to the ideal, if you have 500,000 individuals, which is how many elected offices we have in this country, who are temporarily stepping up, stewarding a public office, and then stepping down, then there's very little context for corruption because everyone's coming and going, the whole system's kind of rolling upon itself. It's designed that way. What a tyrant or a monarch is somebody who has power and holds power for an extended period of time. A monarch holds power until they die. A tyrant holds power until they either die or are ousted. So there's a problem when you get power and you hold power for an extended period of time because then you can start to contort the public institutions for private benefit. So what political parties basically have created in our country is a way of extending the reach and the duration and the breadth of power so that while individuals come and go, the systems that hold that power are actually intact and ultimately entrenched. So this is intensely problematic, and it's what has enabled all the major industries and corporate interests who want to usurp public institutions for personal benefit are able to do so because they're able to dock in to the political infrastructure of the political parties in order to make sure that their interests are served. So when we say that we want independents elected, this isn't like a third group. We're saying we want to restore our republic back to the original intent. We want individual, independent citizens to temporarily steward our public institutions, and we want them to do that in a way that's transparent, fully accountable, and highly participatory, and not serving any other interests other than the constituents that they were elected to support. So that's what independent politics is all about. And the reason that is so significant, and the reason why the word revolution, I think, is an appropriate word to use, and I'm not using it as a buzzword or just kind of like a trite concept, but I believe that it's revolutionary when we think about replacing the corporate duopoly with independent American citizen stewards. In every single public office in which an independent is elected, you've conducted a micro-revolution because you've replaced the control of that entire system that's so familiar with controlling the budgets and the sentiment and the policies of that particular office, whether it's a state rep or whatever it is. And now all of a sudden that system doesn't have the same power because now an independent is in office. So the Independent National Convention is a national event platform for independent organizations and individuals from across the country to come together to ask the question, how do we start working together more effectively so that independents have the collective political power necessary to aggregate enough votes to be able to be more effective and more reliably put independents in office while processing the sophistication of the fact that independents come from different ideological backgrounds. So that's what we've been talking about for the last couple of days. We have the Forward Party here as a major partner. We have the Libertarian Party represented. We have people from the Green Party. We have people from all different types of independent parties. And so there's a lot of independent parties, I use that term rather than third party, that are all working to establish organizer networks and ballot access. But what our organization is offering, our organization is United Independents, and we're the producer of the Independent National Convention, is we're offering the narrative as well as the constructs of movement building to help to be able to create connective tissue amongst all the different independent actors, the parties, the nonpartisan actors, the reform networks, so that we can start to gel together as a united independent movement, coordinate more effectively electorally so we can become more effective at putting more independents in office.
Awesome. I think there's a reason. There's so many reasons. There's so many reasons colliding right now where for the first time in history, there are more people in the United States that identify as independents than identify as Republicans or Democrats, more than in any point in history. I believe that our citizenry is reaching a breaking point where they are tired of being told that they should hate each other, frankly, that we are supposed to vote the way we're told, that we're supposed to accept what we're given, and that our voices matter less and less. I was in the interview room earlier, and I was asked why I started TikTok Townhall. And I have this very, very visceral memory. When I was young, I think I was in 7th grade, when Ross Perot was running for office. And we had a student debate. Each of us had to represent a candidate. We had to get up there and argue, and I got assigned Ross Perot. And whoever won the debate at our school also got to call in live to a town hall for students with all of the presidential candidates. I got to call in and ask Ross Perot a question. And for the longest time, no candidate in the United States could get elected without going to town halls in their communities and across the nation if you were running for a national office and answering directly to the people whose vote they were seeking. And there came a moment shortly, really, after Citizens United, right around 2012, where we traded the accountability we had always demanded. Because if a candidate didn't come and meet us where we were, ask us what mattered to us, and answer the questions that we wanted to hear answered, they could not get elected. They were eviscerated in the press for not hosting town halls. And it was really in 2012 where we had the last national multi-president debate-style town hall, and even that one was hosted by CNN. And it came out after the fact that they pre-screened all the questions and they were hand-selected. And it wasn't a town hall. We traded the accountability we demanded for the convenience of being told who to vote for and what to believe. And this year, I made a conscientious choice that I was never gonna vote for the lesser of two evils again. If you didn't earn my vote, you don't get my vote. If you don't meet me where I am, I don't owe you that. I don't owe a party that. And so I decided that I wanted to restore accountability. And I knew that social media was creating the perfect storm for it. People have access to infinite information. And there are entire weeks right now where primetime shows on CNN are getting less than 100,000 views. I get that in 2 hours on TikTok. Okay? 2 hours. Why would a candidate ever think it was a better investment of their time to pack up a security team, rent a stadium, or even like just a small venue and go see 10,000 people when they could see 200,000 people from their den and actually meet their voters where they are? I knew the perfect storm was coming. I just needed a few candidates that were willing to take the leap. And here we are. Here we are.
I'll tell you a very interesting backstory that led to this moment. Is I had articulated all the different panel conversations for this event, and I had a panel called Alternative Media, the unfair advantage of the independent movement. That was what we were gonna talk about. And then Kyle connected us, and then this whole thing happened. And we're actually having the embodied experience of that unfair advantage through alternative media. So I'm so stoked the way that sometimes you say a prayer and then it happens, but even better than you imagined it would happen. So we're having that experience right now. And I really appreciate your story and the backstory that you have and where you're coming from in all of it. And I'd love to maybe introduce you or have you introduce yourself.
We're gonna introduce you, and then we're gonna come in. And when you introduce yourself, tell everybody about your channel and tell them what draws you to giving voice to independent politics, because you do.
Absolutely. So I am on TikTok as Logic and Liberty. I got started about 4 years ago from an activism standpoint. I think a lot of us, at least in my generation, being a millennial, woke up around 2020. We saw a lot going on within the government that we didn't agree with. We felt voiceless. We felt helpless. So that's when I jumped in. TikTok is an incredible platform for the reach that you can gain so quickly and the connections that you can make. I've met Tiffany off of TikTok. I'm literally here from meeting her on TikTok. So I found a huge lack of information, a lack of civil discourse when we talk about politics and the issues that are plaguing this country. And so my goal was to get out there and harness that and just try to see if we can bring individuals to the table to have a conversation. We're not gonna agree on everything, and that's why I love independence, right? Because I feel like as Americans, we have to take these two candidates and say, well, I really don't like these stances. I don't like their stance on these issues. But if you were to get more independence in the game, you could have someone who aligns with you almost completely. And that's so important for us to start to move towards. And so I think just starting the conversation, getting people engaged, because so many people are on social media, especially the younger generations, get the information out there and have the conversations, and anyone can do it from anywhere. That's what's so beautiful about it, is little old me, who never knew I would be up here on this stage, was able to engage an audience, and people resonated with what I had to say simply by trying to garner productive conversations around politics and what we need in this country.
And what we're doing, it's shifting the mainstream media narrative too. They don't like it, but they can't look away from it. I've been on the cover of the New York Times. I've been in Wired magazine twice. I was on the cover of the New York Times this week, covering the TikTok trial at the DC Circuit Court. I was live streaming it from outside the courthouse this week and ended up on the cover of the New York Times. I didn't even know. Someone had to call and tell me. I missed that I was there. I was on the BBC this week. I was on ABC this week. I was on Christian Science Monitor. I didn't know that one. They can't look away, because if they do, they need people who are coming to us to come back and read them. So they have to cover us. They don't have a choice. Ian, I'm going to expand you, and I am multitasking, so everybody bear with me. But Ian, we're going to ask you to introduce yourself and explain why you, hold on, there he is, why you feel so inclined to give voice to independent voices, because you've been on almost every single town hall I've done, and you've helped me immensely, so please.
Absolutely, Tiffany. Thanks for bringing me in. And I kind of come at this from a funny and different angle, where I never intended to get into politics at all, and that's still not really my goal. I come from a teaching background, and I got into this from an information standpoint of my platform is built on the realization that I didn't know as much as most of us like to think we know, and I just wanted to learn what's going on. And the more you learn and the more you start to pay attention to what is going on, you realize that without the free flow of information, without the free flow of discussion and debate, you really can't have an honest political process. You also can't have an honest economic process or just about any other governmental process. And so the more that I have started to learn and share my process of learning and then have debates with other people about what's happening and experience censorship and experience the various amounts of freedom that we have in different places online as well as in our real lives, the more I can't help but think that the rising tide of independent politics is a mirror to the rising tide of freedom of information and free speech that's enabled by platforms like TikTok, X, and all these other social platforms. And I think it's a natural pushback from the way that our political process and our cultural and social processes have been more and more controlled by bigger and bigger piles of money. And we've been given fewer and fewer choices while being told that we have lots of choices. That's everything from our choices in the grocery store that are actually just a couple corporations that are masquerading as 100 different brands, all the way to our political process that is just this strange theater of two parties that are actually friends behind the scenes and put on a show for us in front of the cameras and never really discuss the real issues that we care about in any sort of honest and unfiltered way. And it was you giving a voice to these town halls where we could actually access politicians directly. That was the first time that I sort of experienced a politician without the filter of pre-screened questions and without the filter of moderators and sort of the corporate control systems that keep the debate within the rails. And it's so motivating and encouraging to see the reach that these sort of independent platforms and independent voices are getting, because the thing about politics and economy, everything, is that if it works, it forces everyone else to follow. And so I just couldn't be more pleased to be here, being a part of the solution to the problem that we all recognize now.
You guys are watching in real time at what it's going to take right now for me to do both of these. We've never done this before.
Was that a censorship issue, Tiffany?
They think that I'm stealing your content right now.
Really?
They think I'm stealing your content.
Well, it may be that. It also may be that we have legitimately been censored.
Yes, that's very possible.
So what happened?
We've been reported live. Now we're still live, and I'm going to ask everybody in the audience to start sharing it, because they pulled us off the FYP temporarily, but we're still live. They're not taking it down. It's nothing you can do, I promise. Oh, can you fix that?
Just to share some additional content, maybe while this is happening.
Okay.
About of 5 or 6 days leading up to this event, our URL was completely censored. You could not post inc24.us on Instagram or Facebook. The posts were immediately taken down and said that it was some like random statement. And so it's just been very interesting to feel like we're doing something disruptive enough that we've got that kind of attention on us. And I don't know if that's what's happening right now, but it seemed like with what I was seeing on the screen of like, this is being limited or this whatever. I'm just curious if it's all tied into that same thing. But it was really weird. Like you could not post this URL anywhere on social media for the week leading up to this event.
I think a lot of us who are creators, especially on TikTok or other social media platforms, unfortunately censorship has become just nature of the beast. You're going to face it. You're going to have to work through it, but you're going to have to just keep pushing. And I think engagement from the audience, like you guys right now in the live, we appreciate you so much, is vital to keep these platforms up and to keep people seeing them across all social media platforms. So we appreciate you guys.
All right, so we are still live. A few things. I have quite a few mods right now. Mods, with great power comes great responsibility. I, as you all know, do not agree with censorship. So unless somebody is being openly hostile, please don't unmute them. Let them go as long as they're being respectful and trying to learn from one another. We don't believe in censorship in my channels. There are a lot of channels that will automatically turn on all kinds of censorship mechanisms during their live feeds to make sure that their echo chamber is effectively created, right, and maintained so it looks like everybody agrees with them. I don't agree with that. At the beginning of every single one of our town halls, we tell everybody that with great power comes great responsibility, and your responsibility is to make sure that everybody is respectfully given voice and that every opinion is heard, because that's how we learn from each other. If everyone in here would do me a favor and keep in mind that your comments are visible to everybody, everywhere right now, because you guys don't usually see this view. Please keep engaging in the amazing conversations you guys are having in the comments and keep sharing the live stream.
Tiffany, could I pop in with a request from the comment section?
Yes, please.
They're requesting that when I'm not speaking, that you switch the boxes again so that TikTok viewers can view your screen, the main event, as the large box, and me back in the small box when I'm not the featured.
Got it. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Since I just did something. Oh, I got it. Okay.
And I also just briefly want to take a moment to thank the organizers and thank the other panel members. Thank you, Tiffany, because this is so cool to be on the other end of this experience where we're creating not only a convention in person, but a convention digitally, and sharing between the two is really cool. So thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you guys that put it together.
And Ian, I've heard great things about you, and it's very nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll hear all sorts of things about me, because as I'm sure you know, trying to get independent, trying to get information, trying to just do any sort of free speech or dissemination of information outside of that corporate kind of narrative, inevitably they'll come for you. They'll censor your TikToks, they'll censor your URLs, they'll do anything they can to try to keep their two-party system rolling.
So we just had Allie Katz join us on stage. I'd like to take a moment to introduce her. She's one of the organizers of the event, one of the partners of our organization, United Independents. And we've just started this conversation. We've got about 1,500 people, 1,600 people live or so. Allie, I want to kind of jump right into you and have you tell a little bit about your story. I think that would resonate with a lot of average people. I mean, not average, but just people that maybe...
people not in politics.
People that have been in politics, and what your journey's been to get you on this stage at in this moment.
Great. If you could just orient me for a moment. Is there somewhere that is
Oh,
broadcasting
you
to
got
us?
two different.
Okay.
That one right down there.
Okay,
Yeah.
right there. Okay. Hi, everyone. So good to see you here. Thank you. Thank you for caring enough about our well-being, our country, and our future to be here and take the time to be here with us today. It took a lot to get me here. And I think that's really the story that Christopher wants me to share is I am a mother, I am a business owner, I'm running a big enterprise, I'm creating content in the world to bring out my own message and do my own work, and now I'm hearing that that's not enough. It's not enough for me to just be focused on my own personal reality, my own personal survival, there's a collective that I really need to be thinking about, not just in the context of legal and financial systems that I want to impact in the world, but politically. And it took a lot of persuasion on his part for me to be able to see that politics, the way that I'm holding it now, is personal. Politics is our collective responsibility, and we actually can make impact and we can make change, even though as I came on the stage, I heard this gentleman sharing, we're being censored. And so what do we do if we can't use the big media platforms to get our collective message out there into the world, that we want a world that works for all of us, not just for the few that hold power? And it seems like this town hall is a perfect example of that. You said how many people are here with us live? 1,700. Okay, and I would love to know, how, okay, so I see people saying things. I guess you all are working. Tiffany, you're working on the camera issue.
They are working on it.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Everybody can hear you for sure.
Okay, great. And so we're here on TikTok. Is that just getting
We are
a
live on
orientation
TikTok.
here? Great. And so it seems like these are the tools that we need to be using to be able to come together to make the change that we want to make. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for doing this as well.
Yeah. Well, we have been organizing with hundreds of people at this event over the last couple of days. And to Tiffany's original point, we immediately are now talking to thousands of people. And so it's so powerful to really get into this conversation. And I'm very inspired to keep collaborating with you all, to keep doing this type of work. And I think what I'll do, just kind of while we're all doing this, is just update you on some things that are actually happening at the event currently to kind of bring you into the space a little bit. So we've had multiple days. We've had dozens of panel conversations, incredible keynotes. We had Marianne Williamson here last night, and she delivered just a stunning keynote that left everybody completely riveted. You guys want to give another round of applause for Marianne last night?
She was so fantastic. Wow.
And we've been bringing together many dozens of national leaders of the U.S. independent movement, including the leadership of Forward Party, including the leadership of American Values, which is a super PAC that supported RFK, including dozens of people that worked at a national level in the RFK campaign that are all now coming here to collaborate on what happens next. And in about 30 minutes, we're about to go, Allie and I will be leaving this stage, and Dan Osborne and Chase Oliver will come and join the conversation. But we're about to go with several dozen leaders from the U.S. independent movement to have a conversation about formalizing a united independent movement, about really putting all those pieces together, establishing a leadership council, and creating the official organizational apparatus to organize a national independent movement.
And I'm so thrilled to see some of these comments and see somebody saying this is the kind of event that gives us hope.
Oh, great. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the kind of event that should give us hope because it's actually happening right now. And we use the term the independent sector or the independent movement. And what people have been referring to when they've said the independent movement thus far is just the fact that more and more Americans identify as independents. But there hasn't actually been a formal movement. It's just been the idea of a potential movement. But what's happening at this event, and literally what's about to happen in the next 30 minutes, is we're gonna kind of have the conversation and invite formal partnerships and synergy to move this independent sector from a siloed, decentralized sentiment to a formal, structured national movement that we can organize and develop intentionally over the next 10, 20 years, but start having immediate results, because the first task of this leadership body and of this movement is to put a block of independent congressional candidates into Congress in 2026. And imagine for a moment how that can transform the political landscape of our country and our world. Because right now, so many people who identify as independent say, yeah, but independents can't get elected at a federal and national scale. When we do the work to be able to ensure that a block of independents get into Congress in 2026, and we're fully devoted to making that happen, the finances, the organizing, the strategy, the coalitions, all the pieces, and we put 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 congressional officials into the House in 2026, we'll establish an independent caucus. Both the left and the right, in order to pass anything, will have to appeal to that caucus. That will make that caucus intensely powerful despite being relatively small in number, and it'll prove that we can elect independents into national office, and it will attract more financial resources, and more incumbents will consider leaving their party affiliations because they can see a path to re-election as an independent. And we're intending to really, like, think about that Model T old engine where you have to like crank it over. Like, we want to crank this movement over in the next 2 years and build a positive feedback loop from there ever after we realize, oh my gosh, we can do this. We can decisively declare independence from the two-party system. Though it has controlled our American republic for the last 100+ years, it will not control our American republic going forward. Just as Britain controlled the American colonies for an extended period of time, there was a decisive moment in time where independence was declared and self-determination brought about a new era for the American republic. And so we're here right now, 250 years after the founding of this country. And for any of those who care about astrology, Pluto has a 248-year revolution around the sun. And astrologers ascribe Pluto to having significance around the rise and fall of empires. 248 years. It's 2024. Do the math. Pluto is in the exact same position as it was in 1776. And so I feel like there's a clock in our solar system that's striking revolution, that's reminding us of what it means to be an American, that's bringing us back to the spirit of the founding of this country, and helping to inspire us that now is the moment in time to declare independence again, and to be able to realize that we are truly the founders of what happens from here. And I believe that this isn't just a conversation, but that it's destiny, and that we're here to achieve this result.
I want to say, because that was, first of all, I didn't know that about Pluto, and that's amazing. That's a spectacular stat I'm going to use a whole lot in the next couple months, just so you know. I know a lot of people like to talk about independence as wasted votes. I get threatened every time I have a town hall. People look at me and they'll say, when so-and-so gets elected, it's going to be your fault. Do you know how many times every single live, it doesn't matter which one, both parties come to me and they say, when so-and-so gets elected, it's going to be your fault. And I look to them and I ask, I say, are you sure there's no accountability we could create with this narrative instead of making it my fault? If we're going to talk about, most often, I get told that, or I did actually until really around the time of the first assassination attempt, that if Trump got elected, it was going to be my fault. And over and over again, I reminded them that there has to be an introspective look at what brought 71% of the American population to a feeling of independence for the first time in 228 years. And I remind them that it would be far better of them if they want to create accountability rather than laying it at my feet, a person that wants to bring information and choice and just the recognition that we don't have to hate each other. We could just engage in civil discourse back to America. Instead, you could look maybe at your party and wonder why your party has worked against its voters, why it's gone to court with its voters to say they don't owe them anything, why they have hand-selected candidates and ignored your desire to have a primary. Why is it that it's at my feet when in 2016, the DNC went to court with their voters and argued they owed them no duty? And the Bernie voters, in my opinion, played a great role in delivering Donald Trump that win. They went never Hillary and delivered him, which is proof that an independent voting bloc can move mountains. In 2020, we saw the same thing when Bernie, again, was coming into Super Tuesday with 3 back-to-back wins. And all of the candidates were called to the compound of the Obama family. And we're told, you will step back and you will back Biden. And you will all get your positions. And every one of them did the next morning. And their candidate was again hand-selected. And the will of the people was circumvented, overruled. And this year, people so desperately wanted a primary Biden had promised to be a one-term president. And Kennedy so badly wanted to run that campaign. And voters were denied a choice, a vote. They were told, again, trading convenience for accountability, this is who you're going to get, and you're going to vote for him, and you're going to be happy. So how is it then that if Trump was going to be elected, it is my fault and not the fault of the decisions and the machinations of a very powerful organization on either side that have engaged in king-making in a country that was formed because we didn't want a king? Like how? How? Our votes are
Preach.
powerful. They matter.
Well, and Tiffany, I think this is where it is our responsibility to stand internally and to know what really matters to us and to vote our conscience regardless of what anybody else says. It doesn't matter what anybody else says, and as we stand up and vote independent, it sends a message. And so our votes as independents really critically matter more than ever right now. Even though we're not going to get a president into office this campaign cycle, I believe that our vote as independents still matters to send a message that we are here and that we are going to stand for ourselves, whether we're getting a man into office or not, or a woman into office or not right now, into the presidential office. That doesn't matter. What matters is that we are independent-minded Americans who want to have our vote registered as independent, and it tells them we're here and we matter. And that's why your vote matters.
I'll make a couple quick points to kind of bring some of these pieces together, unless you were ready to jump in.
Well, one thing, I did see some comments. People are wondering how they can jump in and support the independent movement and how they can access, I'm sure, these resources. There are a lot of incredible grassroots candidates who simply just don't even try because we know that they feel they have to play into the two-party system. They have to fundraise $1 million to even have a shot at Congress. I mean, it's so disheartening. So how can people find you guys and access those resources to join the movement?
Great, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for those who are interested in getting involved. So what's literally going to happen in our closing general session today is we're going to offer a form for everybody who's been at this convention to fill out around how they want to get involved. So this is not just an event where we educate and we inspire and we just say all the right things and we go home, but we're literally assembling a national independent movement. And inside of that movement, we need different categories of actors. One of those actors is definitely financial partners, so that'll be an opportunity. That's definitely a way to get involved, both in a major way or as grassroots donors. And then we're looking for organizers. So we're building a national network of organizers, and we're treating this like a national campaign. So if you think about the RFK campaign as an example, it was a national campaign that had national leadership, that had regional coordinators and directors. Many of those regional coordinators are here in this event as we speak, that then had state leads, and then had district leads, and then had community leads. So it was a national organizing network that was able to drive the activity of the RFK campaign. So we
got a warning label.
Y'all
Learn more
keep
about the U.S. elections, guys.
Keep tapping the screen, share the live, keep engaging. It does help.
We
to
just
touch
got a
lives.
warning
So-
label, everybody.
How do we find, so I want to go on TikTok right now. I don't know how to use TikTok that well. What do I do?
If you search Tiffany Gianci, you'll see a little pink
Right.
circle around my picture, and you can go in. But if you go in on that, it's going to create a ton of feedback.
Okay, I won't do it.
So don't do it.
Okay, don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
okay,
going to go.
Okay, great.
So what we need to do is build a stable state of organizers across the country. When I say stable state, here's what I mean. The Republican and Democratic parties have organizers that every time there's the next election, they're there to knock on doors, to make a donation, to contribute to those campaign activities in some type of reliable way. There's the person that always hosts the fundraising dinner for whoever the next candidate is, right? So when you run as an independent, you have no network. There's no organizing network. So it's like you and your spouse and your little kid and you're like your red flyer wagon and you're like walking down Main Street, right? So what we need is a national network of organizers who are saying, we are the independent organizers. We're ready to support the next independent candidate in our community. We're gonna help to be able to do all the things that are necessary to help them to be able to win. So anybody who wants to get involved, getting involved in that national organizer network is a really good step in the right direction. And what we just talked about right before we started this, which I believe is gonna be viable, is having this conversation and then pulling this conversation right into our closing general session, which means that you'll be able to hear from Andrew Yang, the founder of Forward Party, Lieutenant Governor Carrie Healy from Massachusetts speaking, as well as a number of other incredible performers who are going to be able to bring incredible music and art and performance forward. And at the very end of it, I'm going to offer this link to this form so that every single person can state their interest in getting involved, and then we can process that as best as we can, send you follow-up links. And if you want to make a donation, we can send you those links out and those types of things as well. But so I've answered your question now. I'll keep that conversation going. And I wanted to answer your question, or not answer your question, but respond to the last thing you said, Tiffany, around the ways that people have been coming at you and saying that, scapegoating you and stuff like that. And there's 2 points that I really want to make here. And it's one that I want to use a tyrant in a country as an example. So we have many countries around the world currently and historically where somebody gets into office, either through violent or election means, they stay in office, and they basically make that entire country revolve around their individual benefit. That's basically what a tyrant is. And this tyrant is going to run a certain set of patterns which are going to start to pull more wealth out of the people and into the hands of that individual and their echelon of people that they support and work with. And that's going to lead more people to become more and more discontent. Those people who are more discontent are going to want to oust that tyrant. That tyrant's going to have to use more violence to be able to repress their population in order to maintain their power. So take that as a pattern and a metaphor. Now let's look at our country. Do we have a tyrant? No, not really. What we have is a systemic tyrant. We as Americans have invented the world's most sophisticated tyrant that's ever existed, which is a duopoly system of control. So we have this systemic tyrant, and we need to be able to know how to declare independence from it. And I feel like this systemic tyrant, as the corporate duopoly, knows that the people are coming, knows that its power is not guaranteed forever, and its power is going to be threatened. And the primary tool of our tyrant in this country, which is not a direct, overt expression of violence against the American people, although we have all kinds of surveillance and there is all kinds of violence, but that's not the direct political weapon that's being used in our country. The direct political weapon that's being used in our country by the systemic tyrant in order to maintain its power is hyperpolarization. It uses polarization as the weapon to be able to maintain its power, because if it can keep everybody going like this, right? And if you look at the topics that get the most amount of airtime that are of economic or social nature, they're the topics that are most divisive.
We know it's the identity politics.
So we're talking
100%.
about these topics to be able to, when I say we, I'm saying the system as it currently is and the media institutions that serve it are talking about the topics that keep dividing us, so it can show how divided we are, so that we can keep doing this lesser of two evils narrative as a way of holding back as long as possible this inevitable tidal wave of emerging civic independent movement. And so the next piece I want to make real quick is that what independence actually means at the core, at a higher level, it's independent from the two-party system. At a deeper level, it's a cultural concept. Independence is thinking, acting, and speaking for ourselves. So when we understand how polarization is being used as a weapon against us, and as we claim our own independence, that we are committed to thinking, speaking, and acting for ourselves, we find the ingredients necessary to take the step off of this two-dimensional spectrum that has helped to be able to keep us pitted against each other, and we literally step off of it. Just like Truman in the Truman Show, as he does his whole journey, and then he goes on the boat, and then he gets to the edge of the world, and then he finds the door of this thing that he was told was the only thing that existed, and he opens the door, and he walks out, and then everyone celebrates this huge euphoric moment of celebration because he escaped the mind control. And so when we get out of being obedient to that hyperpolarization and giving it our power, we are actually, in a perfectly metaphorically appropriate way, we're unplugging ourselves from the matrix so that we can think for ourselves, so that the weapon of hyperpolarization can't be used against us anymore, so that we can reclaim our power and create a new era of American politics.
And ultimately, that is exactly why I got involved, because what we're talking about is preserving our independence and dropping all of the identity labels that keep us stuck in this polarized place, rather than recognizing that one of the most important things that we can do from a consciousness perspective is be able to actually hold two diverging views at the same time and identify, oh, these two diverging views are actually pointing to this higher order third consciousness that is actually more true than either two of the divisive, polarized ideas. And if we can do that, then we can actually come together and create a world that we all want to live in. And it's going to take all of us to be able to do that. And so for all of us to be able to do that, we have to drop these identities. And frankly, we even need to stop looking for a single candidate to save us. Nobody's coming to save us. We get to save ourselves. We get to save ourselves, and the way that we do that is by standing for our independence, recognizing that we are independent-minded. And that means that we get to drop the identity politics and come together, even though there are people that are playing on our identities in order to keep us separate. And so really, this is what the independent movement is all about. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over onto his chair for just a few minutes.
I call it radical civility.
Yes.
People ask me, they say that being an independent is somehow radical. People love that word radical, right? Everybody's a radical, far right or far left. Or what if we're just radically civil? What if we're just radically civil and we just talk to each other? And you know what? We might disagree on some things, and maybe even, just maybe, when we have these difficult conversations, we might even just learn from one another. You know, he's in the tiny box, but Ian, you are like the king of radical civility with me, because you and I disagree on many things and we agree on many things. But every time we come together with candidates and we have these conversations, when we started TikTok Townhall, we very intentionally created a circumstance where we would bring on 3 yeses for a candidate, 3 no's for a candidate, and 3 undecideds for a candidate. And we would have this whole first hour conversation. We were very intentional about making sure it was never going to create an echo chamber. And Ian, you also live quite loudly over in the X space, yes? And so what is it that you think is driving people back towards one another? And how do you think we can continue to foster the conversations necessary to stop driving us apart and to continue to bring us back towards the common sense civility that we really need to make this work? I'm afraid to expand you, but I'm going to try. I'm so scared right now.
It's a great question, Tiffany. And I'm worried that actually I don't personally believe that there is any force in our world today that is driving people towards civility in the middle. I think that all of the powerful forces are still mechanized to drive us apart and to maintain the duopoly. I think the only force that is driving people together is all of us individually deciding to stop fighting and flame warring and gotcha-ing, and instead to start listening and being a little more civil. And it's only through people like yourself that are making those choices in the public space to be an example of civility that we have any form of a push towards that middle. Because I think that though the internet allows us to do so many amazing things, it allows us to hide behind a screen and a keyboard, and it allows this anonymity that sort of can encourage the worst in us, and it encourages us to do gotchas and to forget about each other's humanity. And so I think that actually we really need to be active and present about remembering to bring that humanity forwards into today's discussions, because although we are so much more connected, and although we have so many more people that are fed up with the system, it does not inherently imply more civility. That only comes from our own choice to be more civil, and that comes from every single conversation that you have with someone who's different than you, and not going into it to prove them wrong and to prove yourself right or anything of that nature, but instead to maintain a little humility and maintain a little grace and to remember that everyone is an entire human with an entire life behind them, with an entire point of view that is very much backed up by their real experiences that are just as real and genuine as yours. And you might not know everything. I try to take that perspective into everything I do on the internet. Sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail. But as long as we're trying to move towards civility, I think that we are the force that makes that change.
Team humanity.
Right.
We're all on team humanity.
Yeah.
You know, how many times, Ian, have you heard me say out loud that hatred is so much easier than kindness? It's so easy. And when people are struggling and when people are hurting and when families are suffering and families are struggling, hatred is such an easy pill to swallow. And kindness is such a difficult one to take. And they feed us so much hatred. Because it keeps, as long as people have this misconception that we are in a left versus right system, we are in an up versus down system. And 99.9% of us are in the down. And right now, we are so easily controlled by the divisiveness that we are fed, because it's so much easier to control us if we're all so busy hating one another. We never ever turn around, say, hey, I know we disagree about some things, but what do you say we work together to do this? It's so easy to control us. But when we talk to each other, when we are radically civil, when we remember that it's okay to compromise, and that it's okay to agree to disagree on some things, and it's even okay to disagree on some things and still want to work together on things that we have in common. It is so much easier to divide us and control us than it is for all of us to remember that we're built for this. Humanity is built to serve humanity. We're built to be human, and we're built to work together for a common good. It's the only way that humans became the dominant force on the planet. We worked in strides towards common goals and common achievements and common spectacular innovations. And at a certain point, again, we traded convenience. We traded accepting what we were allowed for what we were capable of. You too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I agree with Ian, your sentiments as well. I think a huge problem is so many Americans just don't feel heard. And I think that frustration, unfortunately, has been harnessed in a very damaging way to this country, where it's harnessed against your fellow American. And what we need to remember is that we as the people should be the voice and the power. But we've handed that over. And unfortunately, when we believe that our candidate is winning, we're still all losing in this system right now. And so I just encourage every single one of you, if you hear that someone is voting this way or that way, before you have that visceral reaction that I firmly believe has been somewhat programmed into us, sit back and say, okay, wait, they're an American who very much likely just wants to ensure that them and their family are safe, that they can put food on the table, have a house to live in, and that they feel like they can pursue all the opportunities that America was founded upon. So I just, again, encourage every single one of you, this is how it starts. This is how the movement starts, is like you said, radical civility, having the difficult conversations, and when you get that uncomfortable, nasty feeling up, just say, look, that's not the people. That's what I've been programmed to believe. Your fellow American citizen is not your enemy. I guarantee you and I promise you. And if we can start to believe that and truly display that daily, we're gonna be able to turn this around.
My absolute favorite statistic that exists in the world is that going back for the last 60, almost 70 years, every single year there are 3 studies that are done on the values that Americans have, what they believe in, what they want for their community, what they want for their children, what they value in their standard of living, what they value in nature that's preserved around them. They would have us believe that we are 90% apart on these issues, on every issue. The reality is that the average Americans at 2 ends of a block, my block, we'll look at my block. I live in a neighborhood that's 200 years old. My house is 200 years old. And my block is the last historic block surrounded by cookie cutter houses that have been built around us. On my block, we have at one end a family that has pride flags and a BLM flag in their front yard. And next door to me, we have a Confederate flag, okay? If you took those 2 households and you lined up the values they have in common, it would be between 81 and 88%. The average American has 93% of their values in common. It is only the 7% on the peripheral, 3.5 way over here in identity politics, 3.5 way over here in identity politics, that they use to convince us we are so hopelessly divided. Like 7%. 93% of everything we care about, you have in common with anyone in this room, whether you know them or not. And when you think about the world, if we could just let everybody understand that, remind them through radical civility and conversation, that that type of cooperation and civility is possible, I mean, we 93% could change everything.
We will change everything.
We will.
So I want to take a moment live to just kind of process our context right now, okay? So we can just kind of get all on the same page. So you are going to be live from this stage up until 6 p.m.
Yes.
At 6 p.m., I think that what you're probably going to want to do is just keep the conversation going, but just off the stage.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have a plan on when you have Chase plan on coming up, but I hear that Dan Osborne is scheduled for 5:30.
Yes.
So either that means that Chase is coming on right now.
Chase will be up in just a couple minutes.
Perfect,
He's
great.
getting to his studio
Okay,
right
that's
now.
absolutely perfect. So we're gonna have Chase on here.
Yep.
Then we're gonna have Dan, and then at 6 or potentially a couple minutes before 6, we're gonna shut this stage down here, and we're gonna do sound check for our musicians for tonight's general session.
Beautiful.
And then you are going to be streaming this entire general session this evening.
Yes.
And I want to invite you all to stick around. I don't know if you got on this live intending to be here for 3, 4, 5 hours, but you have an incredible lineup tonight. And if you need to like make arrangements or tell your friend you're not going to do the thing you were going to be doing with them because you want to really plug into ground zero of the development of the U.S. independent movement, then I highly encourage you to make the arrangements necessary to be with us. So I think with that being said, those are the logistics to process, and this is my departure, because as I mentioned, we're about to meet with a set of national leaders to kind of broker this deal of forming the leadership council of a national united independent movement, which is very historically significant.
Well, and I just want to take a moment. Can we get a round of applause for all the organizers of this
Yeah,
incredible
they've been
event?
killing themselves today.
Thank you so much.
It is hard to understand how this has never been done before. And when I tell you the way the audio-visual stuff went today when we tested it, and you've seen we've had a couple difficulties, we'll know how to do it next time, but I've got to tell you, it's never been done before, and their team is spectacular. All right, so we are very excited. We're about to welcome to the stage, well, actually to the box, somebody that has been on my town hall a couple times, and I've also interviewed him a couple times. I'm a huge fan, just because I like him. He's just the nicest guy. He's amazing. I don't know how to request your camera, Chase. Do you know how to turn on your camera?
I'm trying to figure it out.
Oh, wait, I think I can invite you. Hold on, I see it. Got it. I sent you an invite, and then I'm going to expand you. We're going to welcome Chase Oliver, who is the Libertarian candidate for president for the United States of America for 2024. Did you bring your cats today, or is it just you?
It's just me.
Oh, man. I love your cats. Hello, Chase. Me and
everybody.
tens of thousands, just 1 second, and I promise your face will show. Me and I think we've had probably more than 30,000 viewers pass through, and the audience we have here are very excited to have you on today. I've had the privilege of chatting with you so many times, but not everybody has. And so I'm really, really excited to bring you to the Independent National Convention because I find you to be, first of all, just somebody that is the kind of candidate I'd want to sit down and have a beer with, and the kind of guy that I really love debating on issues with. I also tell people that you're the person I'm probably most afraid to debate with, which is fun because you keep me on my toes. What I'd like to do first is kind of ask you to talk about what you think these independent, some people call them third parties, we're referring to them as independent parties today, what you think is drawing so many people to the independent parties that in numbers we've never seen really ever, and what you think it means for the hope we have for the future.
Well, I think it just comes from a major dissatisfaction with the two-party system as a whole, that they see what is offered to them by the Democrats and Republicans, and it's diminishing returns. We've gotten less and less impressive candidates out of the Democrats and Republicans my entire life. You know, like a Democrat from 30 years ago was infinitely more confident than the Democratic president we have today. A Republican 30 years ago was infinitely better at responding to the needs of constituents than Republicans are today. And so with that, the next generation of voters is dissatisfied. They want something better. They want something new. And that's why so many people are looking outside of the political binary. Earlier, you said it isn't a left versus right thing. I agree with you. This isn't about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. And people are sick and tired of seeing both parties colluding together to take our freedom away from us, to collude together to make sure that those who are on the very top, those who can lobby members of Congress, do very well, and the rest of us are just scraping by. And that's because we have a two-party binary that's been bought and paid for by the corporate oligarchies in this country, and we need to open up the system. And the more parties we have, the better methods we have to vote, the more accurately our politics will reflect the will of the American people. And so that's what I'm fighting for as the candidate for president with the Libertarian Party. It's what I'm going to continue to do after November, whether or not I'm president-elect.
I think that one of the things that is really key. First of all, a lot of people don't understand the Libertarian Party. I always get a bunch of comments. They think it's either Republican heavy or Republican light, and I think both of those comments are very, very wrong. I think that the Libertarian Party is something far more nuanced, and so it's one of the reasons that I always love having you on. One of the things that's come up prior to having you on tonight is that they've created, they being this duopoly, the machinations of control that sort of divide us, have created a circumstance where we have a tyranny of these two parties that control us. And I know how strongly you feel about tyranny. Right now, do we even know who our president is, and how are the American people just going with it? Like, what do you think that means?
Well, first, you're right. A lot of people have misconceptions about us libertarians. You know, they think we're either Republicans who smoke weed or Democrats who shoot guns, right? We're neither of those things. We're actually human beings who love to embrace the concepts of freedom and self-ownership and self-governance. So it's very different than what the two parties offer. Who's the president right now? I mean, the president is Joe Biden, but the fact is he has a giant executive branch apparatus that does most of the work. It would kind of run on autopilot even if you didn't have a president for a while, because they're just kind of set in their ways. They have their mandates. They get their funding increased every year by Congress. So it's kind of like a government on autopilot. And much of that is the reason why we have so much corporate capture of our politics, is because the people who are in charge of those executive agencies, either right before they got in that job or right after they leave that job, are going to be part of the giant corporate structure that helps to basically lobby and regulate everyone else, including the mom and pop businesses across this country. Ask yourself why small businesses are the largest creator of jobs in this country, but the largest profit margins are for the giant multinational businesses. It's because they have gamed the system that way to help themselves. As a libertarian, I believe in true free market economics. Tear all those people apart, and let's actually have real competition instead of gaming the system for the rich and the wealthy and the well-connected. And yeah, Joe Biden's president today, whoever's president tomorrow, or whoever's president in January, it's likely to be somebody who's going to continue debts, deficits, the warfare state, and continue business as usual. And we need to snap ourselves out of the status quo. And that's why it's important to embrace independent parties. That's why it's important to change the way we vote, embrace things like ranked choice voting, so we can take away the spoiler effect.
Oh my goodness. You're getting censored right now, Chase.
I see
Tiffany,
it.
could I jump
see
in with a
it.
question?
Please, Ian.
Chase, it's good to see you again. Good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming. I want to just tackle kind of an elephant in the room kind of a question in the bigger political landscape right now. When we're talking about independent political parties and kind of this growing movement towards independent politics, and then one of the primary independent candidates, RFK Jr., goes and sort of does this political move to suspend his campaign and endorse a part of the duopoly. Do you think that in the sort of more metaphorical big picture sense, that's a blow to the concept of why independent parties matter? Or do you think that's almost more of a a reason why we all see that actually independent parties are important, and that kind of highlights even more the need for independent parties. Do you have a take on that?
Well, I think it certainly highlights the importance of independent parties when the major parties are wanting to try to grab our candidates and grab our votes away and bring them into their party, right? I think, sadly, a lot of RFK voters I've met on the road feel a little let down, like he ran half the race and stopped before the finish line. And I'm committed to being in this race through November. I am committed to challenging Kamala Harris and Donald Trump through November to make sure voters have an option that is not the Republicans and Democrats in the ballot over this country, because I do think it's important to have that alternative on the ballot. I see the strategy that RFK is trying to go for. I don't think that's the best strategy, and I'll tell you why. I have known many people who have tried to go from the independent scene into the major parties to change it from the inside. It never changes the party, it always changes the person. If a libertarian goes in the Republican Party, they don't make the Republican Party more libertarian. They become more Republican. If a Green Party jumps into the Democratic Party, that Democratic Party does not become more green. It makes that Green Party person more Democratic Party, in nature. So that's why I would advise against that. We have to build up a system that is fully outside of the duopoly to encourage voters to challenge it. And it's something that's not. And maybe it's because I'm the first millennial candidate for president, but I think I can look 20 years in the future and see how we can build this if we start today. The building block starts today. We start tearing down the two-party system today, but we have to be realistic and say the results don't come tomorrow. The results will be down the road, and we'll be better off for it. And thanks for that question.
Yeah, great response, as always, Chase. Thank you.
I'm going to come over to, I don't know if have you met Aaron from Logic and Liberty yet, Chase?
Hi, Chase. Nice to meet you.
Happy to meet you.
I'm Logic and Liberty on TikTok. We couldn't stream. There were some echo issues, but I'm so excited to have you here. So when we talk about third-party candidates getting some traction, independent candidates getting some traction, I understand that it will absolutely take movement from the people and engagement from the people. I also personally see campaign finance reform as a huge part of this. And obviously with where we're at in this two-party system, that's super difficult to achieve. We know for obvious reasons. I guess, do you see any path towards that the people could pursue and somehow accomplish? Because again, I think that's going to be vital to get candidates that truly represent us and get grassroots candidates in the mix. Again, the independent movement 100% is a huge part of that. I think the libertarian movement, all these parties. But how can we accomplish campaign finance reform or possibly move closer to it?
Yeah, so as a libertarian, I agree with you on the problem. We might disagree on the solution, though, because I think what we need to have is no limit on campaign contributions to a campaign. They're all dark money. Remove the caps on a campaign, but make them reportable, so you know exactly who is funding your politicians. So you know exactly where the money is coming from. No more dark money. Have as much money as possible, because I do believe money is speech, and I don't want to limit that ability for people. But I want voters to know who's buying and paying for their Congress people. And money doesn't always have to equal victory. We just had a congressional primary in the state of Kentucky where Thomas Massey was outspent like 3-1 by AIPAC-backed candidates. And he still won the primary because his community knows who he is. They backed him because they know him. And I think we can continue to build, even if we don't have the monetary advantage. When I ran for Senate in 2022, my opponent spent $20 to $25 per vote that they earned. I spent 24 cents per vote. So we can do a lot with very little, but I do want to know exactly who it is that is buying and paying and trading our Congress people like auction at a cattle yard. Because that's, once the American people know who it is that's funding these campaigns, they can be a more intelligent consumer of our politics and reject those who are being bought and paid for by terrible corporate interests or organizations or special interests that they don't align with.
There's a lot of comments happening right now in the feed about war. And I know this is a topic that is generally surprising to people when they hear the libertarian perspective, because they so often associate the Libertarian Party with the Republican Party. would you do me a favor and tell people a little bit about the libertarian perspective on perhaps the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, and what it is you believe we as a country need to be doing with the resources that we're allocating there, or if you think they should stay there?
Yeah, so we as libertarians believe in generally a non-interventionist foreign policy. I can tell you exactly what I believe, which is military aid around the world expands our reach around the world in a way we don't want to see. I think it's way better for us to engage our neighbors through peaceful diplomacy, through voluntary exchange, market economics, and direct diplomacy. It's one of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party, is because Barack Obama made a promise that he would meet with any world leader without precondition, and he walked back that promise. He never actually fulfilled it. I think if we had done that, we'd be better off engaging in the rest of the world than engaging in the military conflicts we're seeing in both Gaza and in Ukraine. I still think we can do things to help people. First and foremost, with Ukraine, we can allow individuals to sponsor refugees to come to the United States and get out of the war zone somewhere where they can be safe. And also, I would offer amnesty, if I were president, to any member of the Russian military who is being conscripted into fighting and doesn't want to. This would bring a lot of people out of the front line and hopefully create the conditions to sue for peace. As far as Israel and Gaza, I do believe that if an attack like October 7th happened to us, we would demand a response. But the response has been overwhelmingly destructive. It has killed so many innocent people. It has destroyed billions of dollars of infrastructure. It has made so many people homeless and displaced. And we should not be a party to that as the United States. We should not be contributing to this. We should be contributing to calls for a ceasefire, a release of hostages, and the reigniting of peace talks. And the only way that's going to happen is if the Gazans reject the people who are currently representing them, Hamas, and if the Israeli people currently rejecting who is representing them, the Netanyahu government. The people of both of these nations deserve better, and the only way that's going to change is when the people of those nations rise up and demand something better and demand a peace process. And the United States cannot force that. We must take an approach that says, hands off, you must work towards peace with each other. We're not going to keep supplying the war machine.
If you were going to try to, one of the things that has been a huge point of discussion throughout the Independent National Convention is really focusing on the places where Americans have a great deal of overlap in perspective, where Americans tend to see themselves unified in ideas like spending less, and a lot of people support term limits. A lot of people, we already talked about money in politics and dark money particularly. What would you say in the libertarian platform you would want independent voters who maybe feel themselves common sense voters that are looking for places where they see themselves aligned with these independent parties? What would you want them to know about the libertarian platform that you think they don't know right now?
Well, there's a couple things. First, I think philosophically, our party comes from a place of non-aggression. We basically believe that if you're not harming anyone and you're living your life in peace, you should be able to practice the most local government, which is your own self-governance. The only need for any kind of government is when the civil liberties or rights of others are being violated by your behavior or your actions. And so you can be as conservative as you want to be, or as progressive or out of the box as you want to be as an individual. We just ask that you don't use the government or its mechanisms to try to push those values onto other people. And so again, it's not about left versus right, it's about right versus wrong. And we're a very welcoming party across the spectrum, and we should be in our philosophy. The other thing that I think we need to get across is many people in the independent movement think that libertarians might be selfish. And the truth is that we are not selfish. We're very empathic to other people. We want to help other people. We want to make sure that people who are less fortunate have help in their community. We just think that government is like the worst way to organize that help, the worst way to allocate those resources. And so I would hope that voters can see that just because we don't want government to do something doesn't mean we don't want it to get done. It just means we think we can do it much better at that community engagement level and making those differences in our own communities and not relying on a centrally planned government apparatus to get that done. And I encourage people to check out the full platform of my campaign at votechaseoliver.com, or if you want to learn more about the Libertarian Party and its platform in total, go to lp.org. I encourage you to join our party, join our movement, and I hope to earn the vote of anyone who's watching, whether it's the live crowd or on TikTok, to check out the campaign, and I hope to earn your vote this November.
Chase, we have a large group of what I don't want to make assumptions, but we have a large group of people asking for the libertarian perspective on Indigenous people here in our nation. And if libertarians have a platform perspective on dealings with the Indigenous people of America. I don't see a specific question, but we do have several questions about the libertarian perspective on dealing with Indigenous populations. Do you have anything you can offer us on that?
So I don't think we have any language specific to Indigenous populations in our platform, but what I've always advocated is that we need to start honoring actual treaties that we've made with Indigenous populations. We need to quit treating them like crap. We need to quit denigrating them and their contributions to our nation and to the world. And we need to start honoring the agreements that we have made, including, yes, returning land back to Native populations. We have lots of federal land. I think there's plenty of area to be able to return back to these groups. And I also support tribal sovereignty, your ability to completely control what happens on your land as your own nation, and up into including if a tribe fully wants to secede from the government of the United States, they should be allowed to and be their own fully sovereign tribal nation. And I think we need to start the process of how that would go about and start having that conversation to respect those Indigenous peoples who have long been, let's be real, screwed over by people who have come to this country.
I also saw just a little ways back several questions on veterans, and I know generally as a rule the libertarians favor spending less on most things and the government doing less on most things, but I also know you have a particular platform, you personally, I don't know about the party, on Veterans Affairs and the way our veterans have been treated and the things that they need right now for the care they need, the homelessness, the health care. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on Veterans Affairs?
So I'm somebody who, doesn't want the government to spend a lot of money on a lot of things, but one thing we absolutely need to spend money on is when we have a military, honoring the commitment we've made to those members of the military, especially if they are injured upon their return. I of course support, the VA and saying, hey, if a lot of those VA doctors specialize in things like burns or amputations or other things that are very specific to warfare. But if you're a veteran who just needs basic health care, you should not have to jump through any hoops to just go to the closest doctor to you, present the fact that you're a veteran, and let that be covered by the Veterans Administration. I am tired of seeing so much regulatory hurdles in the way of veterans that ultimately adds the cost, the overhead costs. One way to simply reduce those overhead costs is to simplify the process. Allow anybody to go whichever doctor is closest to them for their basic healthcare needs, and if they need to attend a VA hospital or a VA healthcare center for that specialized treatment rather, we should still have that available. We should still make that available for veterans. But much of what we see is veterans talking to me about how they are tired of having to drive hours and hours to just get their basic healthcare needs met. And we can simplify that by just saying, hey, go to the closest doctor to you, and we will pick up the tab.
And one of the ways that veterans are struggling right now is that I realize it's often related at its core to healthcare and mental health care and just what they've suffered through in their service to our country. But veterans are suffering with severe homelessness all across this nation. And I know we also have a housing crisis in this nation. One issue that recently was addressed was that UCLA was bequeathed a very large plot of land. And in the will, it was left to UCLA. I believe it was UCLA. It could have been USC. I think it was UCLA. It was said in the will that it had to be used to create veterans housing and a veterans center for veterans care for veterans suffering in California. And UCLA quietly forgot about the will and the trust that it was left in. Or USC, I don't want to make a mistake. And they sold it to the highest bidder to make a athletic facility. And they were turning it into a for-profit center. And the veterans of California sued, and they just won. And over 100 acres was returned to them of prime California real estate. And all of the money that was bequeathed with it is now going to creating housing for veterans because it was left in the will of a former veteran that had done very well for themselves. And that's one way to tackle it in one place with one person's money, but it is a nationwide problem.
Yeah, well, I'm glad they honored the contract. That's one of the things we support very much in the Libertarian Party is honoring contracts, and that includes wills. And I'm sorry that people had to fight in court to get what was belonged to them back. It's ridiculous. The entitlement of whichever institution that was. I'm not going to name it because we don't know which one exactly. It could be one or the other. So, but boo on them. But you're right. We do have a housing crisis problem. Much of that has to do with, frankly, NIMBY liberals who are all about saying we need to have more housing, but as soon as you bring up wanting to build high-density housing in their neighborhoods, they say, oh, not in my backyard, we can't do it here. I'm one for removing housing regulations altogether so we can build more high-density housing, also more transitional housing for those who are currently unhoused. Things like tiny home villages that allow organizations, particularly nonprofits, to build these tiny home villages that allow for transitional homes, get people off the streets, give them a roof over their head, allow them to find employment, allow them to get themselves clean and sober if that's what they need to be doing. And then you transition out of that house and then you move someone else into the tiny home. These are ways to address homelessness at the community level through direct involvement that you don't need a large centrally planned government apparatus. In fact, if we reduce the size of the central government, brought a lot of that money back into our communities and back into our own pockets, we could better allocate those resources in areas of need as opposed to relying on an army of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento or wherever to make those determinations. We can make those determinations. We can help one another if the government gets off our back and off our necks with taxation and just being so huge.
I want to give more questions to Aaron and Ian, but we did just have a question come in from user Jolene, and she wants to know where you stand. I'm going to combine two questions. I didn't catch the second name, but they want to know where you stand on term limits or age limits for office in the United States, or if there's any barrier to entry to office that you would support to protect the interests of the American people.
So, philosophically, I support term limits, but I do recognize that to impose those, you would have to amend the Constitution. That requires 3/4 of the state legislatures and a supermajority in Congress, and I don't think those members of Congress are about to limit themselves. Unfortunately, that's kind of a bug in our system. So I don't think it would happen as much as I would like it to. Like, I've signed the term limits pledge of 3 in the House, 2 in the Senate. I think that's fair. I don't know if that's going to happen. Now, as far as age limits, the number one way to create term limits and age limits is for voters to stop voting for people who have been there forever or for really, really old people. That's the ultimate way we can have age limits and term limits. But, Canada, our neighbors to the north, they have an age limit on their Senate and their Supreme Court of 75 years. Again, we'd have to amend the Constitution to do that, but it sounds like a really good idea when you start hearing it. But again, I don't know if we'll ever be in the position to actually get that done. But as voters, we can do that ourselves by just refusing to vote for people who are in their 80s to be representing a population. Did you know Joe Biden is older than like 97% of America?
Yep, I did know that. And I gotta tell you, it's been pretty hard to watch how quickly individuals of that particular age group can decline, especially when they're under.
I know, we're seeing it from Trump too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have look at the Senate. What's the average age of the Senate right now? Something like 67. It's really, really old by comparison with the average age of Americans. And that's because once they get there, they can utilize dark money to keep it there. And they can utilize the two-party system to make sure they stay forever. And that's one of the reasons so many people do support term limits, is because it was never intended to be a job where you came and you never left. I think one of the hardest things that I've watched maybe in my adult voting life was when Dianne Feinstein, who gave her life to service to the country, sure, and also became very, very wealthy doing it, was wheeled out to an essential vote, and she didn't know where she was. And we watched on live television, where no law could prevent it, as a 19-year-old aide told her over and over again, just say aye. What are we voting on? Just say aye. What are we voting on? Just say aye. Aye? And they counted that as her vote. That was traumatic to watch as an American citizen and know that there was nothing we could do to stop it. She didn't even know what room she was in. She should have been home with her very, very, very good congressional pension and congressional retirement plan. But because of the people she owed, because of the power that was transferred to keep her there, she had to stay. And that's how she passed.
But we can't worry about that, Tiffany, because democracy is on the line. It's on the ballot. If we
ballot.
don't vote within the two-party system, all
It's
of
on the
democracy is
ballot.
doomed. And we can't stop electing old people because they're eating the pets right now, okay?
Right.
Like, we're just in the area where we got to have 80-year-old people running this country and saying whatever things they saw on Facebook is fact on a debate stage. That's what we need. In all seriousness, it is tragic that we can't just let our grandmas and grandpas in Washington, D.C. retire. You know, let them spend more time with the family. They shouldn't have to go through a sex scandal before they realize they need to spend more time with their families, right? We just need to let them go ahead and retire and, you know, spend time with the grandkids. We can handle it. Millennials got this, trust me. We're used to having everything piled onto our shoulders and having to deal with it anyways. We already teach the boomers how to handle their technology. Just give the technology over to us. Let us run things. You guys retire, and we'll prepare it for when Gen Z and Gen Alpha rise and skibbity whatever they want to do. But until then, like, let's us millennials do the thing, right?
Ian, can I kick?
I would jump in there. Yeah, I would jump in there with another question about the people that are currently running things in the direction of our monetary system. As we just watched the Federal Reserve reduce the federal funds rate by 50 basis points, and the beginning of the same pattern we've seen over and over again, that is likely to lead to tough financial times for those that are counting on their dollars to be worth a lot, and really great financial times for those that are holding on to lots of assets that are probably about to be worth far more. This endless economic cycle controlled by the Federal Reserve as though it's just the nature of the universe. What is your and or the Libertarian Party's stance on the Federal Reserve and the monetary system? And if you had no barriers to achieving your goals, how would you change the monetary system to be more libertarian, so to speak?
I mean, we want to end the Fed outright. We want to remove ourselves from the federal the Federal Reserve System altogether. We'd like to return our money back to being backed by something that's finite. I say whether it's gold or silver or saffron or whatever, pick something. Let's make it, create a value around it and create our money being backed by that, as opposed to this imaginary fiat currency thing we have going on. My running mate, Mike Tremont, by the way, he's an economist of over 20 years. He likes to say, like, why do we have a monetary policy where 6 people go into a room and they just kind of look into a crystal ball and they decide what the economy is going to look like and they make their determinations that way? I rely, instead, I think we should, on the trillions and trillions of individual marketplace decisions to guide exactly where our economy goes, as opposed to 6 well-connected people who are really in it to the benefit of the banks and, again, these giant corporate interests. So libertarians are all about in the Fed, remove ourselves from this broken monetary policy and fight for something better. Also, in the meantime, embrace things like Bitcoin and fight against things like the central bank digital currency, which will remove privacy and remove the dollar from our lives altogether. Cash is far better than a digital dollar because they can turn a digital dollar off. They'd actually have to take the money out of your pocket to remove the dollar. So, all that to say, in the Fed today, in the Fed tomorrow, in the Fed forever.
We have some applause happening in the audience right now. I'm going to come down to Erin from Logic and Liberty. She has a question about social media.
So I know libertarians typically are, I would say opposed to most federal restrictions, legislation, etc. My question is, though, when we look at social media, to me, an argument can be made that we can't just classify it, in my opinion, as a private company. It's a public square. And what we've seen with Mark Zuckerberg's letter about the request for censorship from the federal government and its potential impact on elections, what is the libertarian approach to ensuring that we don't have influence from the federal government to censor Americans across the country and potentially, like I said, influence elections?
So I actually want to flip the script there a little bit. I don't want to call it a public square because if you call something public, you're giving the government the ability to regulate it. The government regulates public utilities all the time. Do not call it a public square. It is a private space to say what you want to say. What we need to be insisting is that government does not interfere, doesn't send these letters to Mark Zuckerberg and others and keeps their hands away from private social media property, which is exactly what it is. It's the same as if government tried to come into my home and say what I can say in the comfort of my own home. No, that's my property. Meta is the property of the shareholders of Meta, led by Mark Zuckerberg. X is the property of Elon Musk, and the government should just keep the hell away from it. They should keep their hands off of it altogether. And if Mark Zuckerberg wants to create the terms of service and decide what can and can't be on their platform, and same with TikTok or X or any other platform, they have the right to do it. The government should not be pressuring. The government should not be coercing. And so we need to recognize the best way to handle that is to actually pass legislation preventing the government from investing itself into social media, from putting its hand into social media and trying to change the way social media communicates. That, again, can be left up to the shareholders, to the individual consumers who use these platforms. But like most things, as a libertarian, keep the government out of it.
I agree with you, and I can level with you to a certain extent. I guess let's say we have independence or more libertarian influence, my concern is that the federal government will continue to put pressure on these social media platforms. We see the TikTok ban currently being fought out in courts. And so I guess, not necessarily from regulating the social media companies, but getting the federal government out of that arena. And how do we ensure that we at least create a barrier of some sorts there?
We insist that Congress pass legislation preventing executive agencies from contacting social media firms for the purposes of directing their messaging. Plain and simple. And we create penalties for that if an executive agency violates that order. So that way you won't have the FBI or the FDA or the CDC or anyone else trying to contact these platforms. And if they do, there is a mechanism for the people to sue these agencies and to get people punished and eventually possibly arrested for these things, because we do not need to be denying people's free speech rights. The purpose of our government is to protect the inherent rights of all people, and that includes protecting ourselves from the government trying to invade on those inherent rights. We need to create legislation that does this, and if I were president, I would sign such legislation.
Can I piggyback on that? I'm not going to stay with social media, but I'm going to stay in the tech space for a moment. What about AI? Because I have big concerns about AI. I watched last week as a congressional member was deepfaked. His office created a deepfake of him to come and testify in Congress and to convince everybody watching at home that he was the one doing it. It was very, very convincing. I would never have known. And they can do that with any of our politicians. No, they can do it with me. They can do it with me today, tomorrow. Anybody can clone someone's voice at this point. And the imagery, right now, CapCut. No shade to TikTok, they're keeping up with the times, but I'm part of the Emerging Creators Program. And I was in a CapCut seminar 2 days ago, where they now have a new program where CapCut, if you want to get more content made, you just write a script and you create a clone of yourself. And it clones your voice, and it makes a model of you, and it will make your content for you. And it was terrifying. We watched it happen in real time. Anybody can make a clone of yourself right now, and people will believe it's you. I would never have known. They were doing it in real time. It was terrifying. So where does the Libertarian platform, or at least Chase Oliver's platform, fall on AI and whether or not there is a need for regulation there?
Yeah, so I think it's more like an AR arms race, so to speak, that we're going to have to keep finding technology that can detect the deepfakes, that can detect when AI is being used. I don't think that's going to be best facilitated through the government. I think they would do a really piss poor job of being able to figure that out. I know it's going to be technological innovation that's going to basically self-regulate AI. I see potential for bad in AI, but I also see great potential for good. I see the ability to streamline our work streams, make it far easier to produce things that will create more efficiency and ultimately lower the cost of goods or services on down the line. That's where the great potential is. I recognize with new technology, there's always fear, and there's always trepidation. There's always like, what do we do? And like, use the internet, for example. People were thinking the internet is going to could possibly like bring down all of society. It's going to disconnect everybody. We'll all be just like plugged in like robots into the matrix. And there were people who at the beginning of the internet said, we need government to step in and regulate the internet heavily so we can stop these terrible things from happening. I argue that not having a heavy regulatory hand actually helped the internet far more than having a heavy regulatory hand would have. I think we need to similarly look at AI the same way. There's great potential for good. There is potential for bad. But we also need to recognize that it's human innovation and technology that's going to overcome the worst aspects of AI and not some sort of government program or government regulation, because you can regulate something and it'll still be done in the black market regardless. So instead of trying to criminalize AI or trying to create some sort of heavy regulatory state around it, recognize that it's both the companies that produce AI and companies that will produce technologies to detect AI that are really going to lead us forward. And so I take a laissez-faire approach to AI much as I would have the internet on its outset if I were around then.
Can I jump in there and ask a question that kind of wraps up a lot of the thoughts that we've just talked about with Chase?
Please, Ian.
I love talking to you, Chase, because you often answer questions in a way that seems contrarian at first, and then by the end of your answer, everyone in the audience is like, man, I never thought of it that way. And all of the answers to the various questions that we've just talked about, basically, if I were to summarize it in my own words, I think I'm generally on point, is more or less that the free market will take care of it better than the government would, and we should let the free market do its thing, because inevitably that will find a better solution that is not opening the doors to tyrannical control as it's found. So I guess that the obvious question that kind of hovers in my mind is that you can't have a free market if you allow for monopolization to occur in some form or other, whether that be the free market of ideas, the economy, free market, whatever it is. So what's your stance on any sort of government regulation on monopolization in either the marketplace or in the tech space, or just monopolies in the bigger sense in general? Is that a space for regulation, or am I missing like an angle on that?
Yeah, thank you for the great question. And first off, the biggest monopoly right now that we see is government's monopoly on violence. That's why I support things that being done outside of government, because they don't, the free market doesn't have that built-in advantage of, oh, well, we can just arrest or bomb somebody if we don't like what they do, right? So they have to work on a different parameter than the government does. But as far as monopolies, what we need to stop doing is this mindset of too big to fail. In 2008, when the housing market crumbled and the banks were failing, we should have let them fail. We should have let those giant banks fall into pieces and been 12 or 15 or 20 banks instead of consolidating power from 5 banks to 3. And that's really the problem, is what we do is every time business is about to fail, all of a sudden we become the greatest corporate socialists ever, and we have to take people's tax money to bail out these corporate interests. No, let them fail. Let their resources fall by the wayside, be liquidated and reallocated into other firms that will better use those resources. When we do that, you will see less monopoly. What actually creates monopoly is government backing these big businesses to begin with. It's what games the system and allows these giant corporate interests to maintain their control over everything, because they game the system that makes it harder for the mom and pop business to compete, to grow, and eventually replace these old corporate dinosaurs that are operating on a playbook that's 20 years old. When really, we all know the innovation of the drive is from those individuals, those innovators at the lower levels. We're going to basically build something up, and eventually it gets bought out by the giant corporate interests, and we start the whole vicious cycle all over again. Instead, allow for a more free market economy, and when these big firms say, oh no, we're going to fail because we've overextended ourselves and screwed people over with shoddy business practices, you say, good, you deserve to fail, you deserve to fall, no golden parachutes for you, fall by the wayside, and watch as your resources get reallocated back into the market.
I could not agree with you more. There's not a single dollar in bailouts or any other dollar that's ever been spent, in my opinion, by the American tax machine that has not wasted 75 cents of it on bureaucracy between it leaving the American people and ever getting back to the American people. And it almost all stops at a corporation or a corporate interest on the way. I've often described it. People keep asking me if we have a free market economy or if this is capitalism. We do not live in capital. We don't live in capitalism right now. We live in socialism for corporations and billionaires, and capitalism, only the negative effects for the everyday working individual. Corporate interests are bailed out at every turn. Corporate interests, big corporations, they are always taken care of by our tax dollars or by the printed money that our tax dollars will eventually be obligated to make up for. And Americans, they're allowed to fail all the time. Americans fail daily. And those constant bailouts are, I mean, really, I guess it's more like socialism, but it's socialism for corporations.
It's cronyism.
Yeah.
It's giving favor to whoever can line your pockets the most. And it's the worst kind of way for us to have a representative democracy.
We have a couple of requests asking if we could get some information on your perspectives on immigration policy, because they know we're coming close to the end. We're being asked to discuss the libertarian immigration policy and your policy as the border stands right now, which is obviously wide open and with very heavy inflows.
Well, I support a 21st century Ellis Island. I think we need to recognize a few things. First off, immigrants are a net positive to this country. They create businesses, they create jobs, they grow the economic pie. Over 40% of Fortune 500 companies are currently headed up by immigrants, the children of immigrants. The GDP that those companies, immigrant-owned businesses, produce across the country, across the spectrum, is larger than the GDP of Japan, which is the third largest GDP producing nation in the world. And so we need to recognize that immigrants are a plus in this economy. They have helped build the United States up to be the economic engine and powerhouse that it is. We do have a crisis at our southern border. It's not because immigrants want to come here and work and fill jobs that need to be filled. It's because our government does a piss poor job of actually streamlining the process and letting people come here with documentation. So people bypass the broken system, come here without documentation. Their labor is exploited, which drives wages down for American workers. They have to live in the shadows because they know if they're found out, they risk being deported, so they don't report the crime that might happen in their neighborhood because they live in the shadows. And the way we fix this is to bring these communities out of the shadows, to give people documentation to work, so that way they can actually compete without driving down American wages, so they can come here and build something for themselves. And lo and behold, if you actually allow for free movement at the border, much of the labor that is here, say in my home state of Georgia, where agriculture is one of the largest employers of immigrant labor,
Uh-oh. We have our first freeze. I'm kind of impressed we made it an hour and 47 minutes, if I'm being honest. Let's see what's going on. Chase, you're frozen if you can hear me. It's not as bad as it could have been. Oh, trying to reconnect. Hold on. It looks like it's a Wi-Fi issue. It's not a TikTok issue. That's okay. It happens. Ian, can you hear us? They're offline. That's not us, that's them, I think. Guys in the back, what do I do? Uh-oh. I think it's a Wi-Fi issue, but the screen just went down, so.
Now's a good time to move. Let's unplug and move you to the.
Well, they have to move this off of our audio, like they have to reconnect the audios. But right now,
Need a tech guy.
I need a tech guy. Yeah, for sure. I don't know what's happening. Let me see what's going on with our Wi-Fi. I love live events. It's so fun.
Just repeat. This has never been done before.
Never. It's the first time.
I would say overall quite smooth. So
We have
I'll
it
take
pretty
it.
smooth.
we're back.
There we go.
Are we
I can
back?
hear us now.
Beautiful.
Well, I am back long enough to just, did y'all get the rest of my immigration answer?
We got a lot of it. You were talking about,
Okay.
at the very last part, you were talking
Check
about,
out-
I think
well,
if
check out the
free-flowing border,
website.
free-flowing border, I think was where we left off.
Yeah, so we want to allow people to basically come here as easily as possible. And as I was mentioning at the end, if you're, say, seasonal labor like a farm worker, you can come here, work during planting and harvesting, and then actually go back home with your family with your money, as opposed to what we see today where people are kind of stuck up here during the off season. It's pretty tragic. I've talked to agricultural workers who wish they could go back home and then come back here when they're needed. But our current immigration system just doesn't facilitate that. But if you want to learn more about the 21st century Ellis Island, you can go to votechaseoliver.com, where my full platform is. But unfortunately, I do have to get out of here because I have to get ready to go to a fancy schmancy fundraiser. But if folks want to learn more about the campaign, they can go to my website. And of course,
stay right there.
we
I'm going to get you
encourage
some
them to
followers
support.
right now. Stay right there for 1 second. Everybody in the chat right now, which is 4,156 people, if you are interested in Chase's policies or just in independent parties in general, and you want to know more about the independent parties around you, it doesn't matter if you like them or don't like them. You should be informed about them. I encourage you to drop down, click on Chase's box, and follow him right now. Like, get over there and learn. Information is never the enemy, but it is always the path to understanding. And again, I'm going to keep saying radical civility. Radical civility, guys. So Chase, thank you so much for joining us tonight on TikTok Town Hall, live from the Independent National Convention. I know you have to go. I am so grateful for all the time you gave us. We're about to go through a transition, so I don't know if I
Well,
can disconnect you, but maybe you can.
I will let you transition. I'll disconnect myself, but I'll say the same thing I say to everybody. To everyone who's in the room, everyone who's watching anywhere, I hope you have a life of peace, love, and liberty.
Chase
Thank
for
you, Chase.
Liberty.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're about to transition to the interview room because this room is getting reset for the show we're going to broadcast to you in just a little while. So it's about to get really interesting. A tech person is going to come help me because we're going to go interview Dan Osborne, who's running for Senate in Nebraska. He is an independent candidate that is currently polling at or ahead the Republican incumbent in Nebraska. And he and I actually have a lot in common in our like backstory. He was in a union and was targeted by Kellogg, I think it's Kellogg's, for being a union member and a leader in that union, which many of you know that's how my fight against private equity started. That's what started this whole platform for me, is that I was the head of a trade organization and we got bought by private equity and they really wanted that union broken up. And I became the collateral damage of that circumstance. So I'm really looking forward to speaking to Dan. And we're not going to disconnect. If we do somehow go down, we will be back up in 30 seconds. But we're going to try to maintain this even though the audio-visual might get weird for a minute. Mods, can you help communicate for me pretty please? And we're going to try to keep everybody going. Ian, if you can do that too, that would be very helpful.
You could like flip your camera around as we're walking through the crowd.
Yes, I can do that. I think. You guys know how to switch the camera back to me, right?